So like I said, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Noah. I am the president of the McMaster Outdoor Club here at McMaster University, as well as working within the greater outdoor rec department and the biology department. So this week's outdoor skills workshop, we're focusing on fire building skills and a little bit about how to do it safely and effectively at different seasons and different methods. And then this is really meant to be an interactive workshop where you guys ask any questions you have or share any of your thoughts that you have or skills that you know work. So we like to start off every one of our events with a land acknowledgement. It's important to recognize. So McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations and the lands protected within the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So McMaster University in the Greater Hamilton area has a very rich Native history on the land here, so it's important to recognize that in anything we do. So what exactly are we going to cover tonight? So we're going to go over a little bit of fire safety and intro, materials used to build fires and different methods of lighting fires, as well as construction, weather effects, and then cooking versus warmth-based fire construction. And we'll end it off with any questions you may have, but feel free to ask questions as we go as well. So how are we going to start? So a fire is basically made up of three things: heat, oxygen, and fuel. And so combination of that, we have our oxygen, that's just our air, a fuel is going to be our wood, and then heat is the energy released off of that fire. Two sort of mainstream methods that people know about are the log cabin versus teepee, which I'll go into explanations, but there are other methods as well. So when you go out camping, whether it's in the backyard or in the backcountry, you should always have two methods of starting your fire with you. So whether that's lighters and matches or flint and steels or some of the other methods out there that exist, you should always have two, so one as a backup. And situational awareness is very important as a safety precaution, which we'll go into a little bit more. And you're always going to want to use designated fire pits if you're in campgrounds or even some backcountry sites, also for that safety. And then one thing we really want to stress to people is you're only supposed to use deadfall. This is related to backcountry camping when you're canoeing or hiking. So deadfall means dead trees or wood that's on the ground, lying down, not alive. So if it's standing up, still straight in the air, it's not considered deadfall and you're supposed to leave it. That's how pretty much 90% of all parks work. And so we want to make sure people understand that and are following those rules, as well as not transporting firewood between locations. So if you're going to go camping up north, don't take your firewood from Toronto with you. There's big issues with invasive species and forest pests that can deal really big, both economic and environmental impacts to forests. So we want to try and protect those resources and basically be ethical and follow the rules. So be an ethical outdoors person. So we're going to start off with safety. So basically we're going to start off right at the beginning, nice and easy. If there is a fire ban in effect, which can be made by the municipality, so a city or township, as well as the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So the MNRF creates fire bans for the northern regions of Ontario, and the municipalities focus mainly on the southern regions of Ontario, but there is some overlap as well. There are often, as you see driving north, a lot of those fire signs with the little green, yellow, orange, red, and the arrows. Those are also relevant. If it's on red, fire bans are in effect, but those aren't necessarily accurate all the time. They don't get updated that often. So you really want to look at whatever township website, if you have a cottage or live up north, or if you're going to a provincial parks set their own fire restrictions as well as national parks. So even if there's not a fire ban in the city, there could be a fire ban in the park or vice versa, as well as restricted areas. So depending on where you go camping, you may not be allowed campfires in the backcountry. Many national parks are like this. So next we have construct a proper fire pit. So many times fire pits will already exist, but sometimes they won't. So you're going to want to construct one that contains your fire. So that's like making a rock ring or digging a pit, something like that, that's going to keep your fire contained and not lead to any potential spread. And then don't make a fire larger than you need for cooking and warmth. So cooking fires are normally fairly small, warmth fires are a bit bigger, but you don't need to have this giant bonfire unless you're in your backyard, and then it's not as big a deal. But especially when you're camping, you're going to want to keep that smaller and contained because it doesn't take much for a fire to get out of control. Be cautious of wind, especially higher winds. It's very easy for sparks to get caught and spread. That's how the majority of forest fires are started. Don't place anything near a fire that could burn or melt. It sounds self-explanatory, but a lot of people make that mistake and end up having melted shoes or burnt towels and things because they'll put wet clothing near a fire and then forget about it and come back and it's all burnt up. Always have a water source or dirt source nearby. So that's to extinguish your fire in case of an emergency. So if you are near a lake or a stream, that's perfect. If not, but there's water nearby, maybe bring a bucket of water. Or if none of those are available to you, you're going to want to create what's called a dirt or sand pile. So don't be like, oh, I'm just in the forest, so there's dirt all around me. You're actually going to want to dig some up. So you've got a little pile here. And basically, if your fire starts getting out of control, you're able to pick that up and dump it on the fire to put it out as well. A big, big, big one is always fully extinguish a fire when you're done. So if it's smoldering, it's not out, you're going to want to completely extinguish that fire. This also is for when you're going to bed at night. So if you're on a multi-day camping trip, do not let your fire go out, like continue all throughout the night, because you don't want to make one in the morning. You need to put that out when you're going to bed. So fire should always be monitored. I know that might be debated amongst some people, but for safety and practicality reasons, it's very important. If you're asleep and something happens and the fire picks up, you could end up causing a lot of damage to the forest around you, as well as putting yourself at unneeded risk. And if you start a forest fire, you are on the hook for the cost of fighting the forest fire. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So materials. So we kind of break them down into 4 big categories. So kindling and small little bits and pieces of wood is what you're kind of starting your fire off with your little embers. And then you'll move on up to smaller twigs and sticks, and eventually medium-sized logs, and finally your big massive logs that you most likely have cut with a saw or an axe. And you kind of build your fire up from there depending on which method you follow. So this would all be for wood, but there are other materials that you can use to start a fire as well. These mainly fall under the kindling section. So instead of wood for kindling, you can use some of these other items. So they include birch bark, technically I guess still in the wood family, but different. So birch bark is really great because it is flammable whether it is dry or wet. So it's a really useful tool out in the wilderness. But we really need to stress that you do not peel it off of live trees. So trees use bark as a defense mechanism for pests, as well as for transporting water and other nutrients. So if you're peeling bark off the tree, you're killing the tree in the process. Well, it's a big issue in camps and campgrounds and provincial parks where people have gone and stripped all the bark. And there's a big ring around the tree. That tree will eventually die because of that. So if you're going to collect birch bark, only do it from dead trees that are on the ground. Other great ways to start a fire is pine sap, pine needles, pine cones, things like that. Pine and conifers, the sap and oils in them are really flammable, so they're really great to use, and that'll light wet as well normally. Dry mosses and grasses and leaves don't really work because they mainly just smoke, but moss and grass will light pretty easily. Dryer lint is a great one because it's pretty much available in everyone's house. Almost everyone has a dryer, and that lint that collects is super, super flammable and also really lightweight. So it's great to like pack some of that in your bag when you're going camping in case you need a quick fire starter. It's also the reason why they tell you to empty the dryer lint out of your dryers every so often, because it is a fire risk within your dryer as well. Petroleum jelly, which is also called Vaseline. That's what one of the brands it's marketed under. That's also quite flammable because it's an alcohol-based product. So a lot of people will dip cotton balls in petroleum jelly and bring them as a quick fire starter. Battery and steel wool, not really that often used, but basically when you connect like a D-volt battery to steel wool, it produces a spark. And so you could start a fire that way. Hand sanitizer and alcohol wipes for their alcohol content are also super flammable, and you can kind of use them the same way you would the petroleum jelly and cotton balls. And then for tampons and pads for women or even men, they are basically just giant cotton balls. So they light perfectly well and super fast, and they're great as well. Paper is not on here, but it's also a perfectly good option as well. So this is just a very short video showing a couple of different materials getting lit, and you can kind of see which are easier to light than others and which stay lit for longer. So we're just going to quickly watch this. So from left to right, as you can see, we've got dryer lint, birch bark, paper, twigs, so little pieces of wood. You've got kindling, and then on your far right there is a candle. So candle wasn't on our last list, but candles are a really great way to start a fire as well. So as you can see, pretty much everything got lit except for the twigs. Twigs actually take a lot of heat to light. So they should not be your go-to fire starter material. You should have another base. So kindling is really great, where it's that split, fine graded wood, as well as other methods like paper, birch bark, and dryer lint. You can see how quickly those lit up. Dryer lint, as you can see, is still smoldering there in the corner. Once it's lit, it stays hot for a little while. And we've got our little birthday candle over there in the right-hand corner that stayed lit the whole time. So I'll talk about a little bit later when you might want to use a candle. It's also a great thing to bring when you're backcountry camping. So 3 main fire starters. Lighters, as you just saw, quick and easy. The Bic lighter is kind of the go-to camp lighter because it's small and lightweight. Be careful because these are not waterproof, so if they get wet, they will not work. You can get waterproof lighters, but they're a bit more expensive. Another one is matches. I suggest getting waterproof or windproof for strike anywhere matches because they're much better and they will work more effectively in different conditions. And the other big common one is flint and steel. A bit hard to use, but if you kind of get the technique, they are quite effective as well. And if you get ones that have a longer flint rod, then they will produce more sparks as they go, and you are more likely to get a fire started more quickly. When you're using the flint and steel method, you want to be concerned about wind though, because you need those sparks to kind of stay in one spot to really heat up whatever you're trying to light. So the first method of construction we're going to talk about is the log cabin, as you see us building here in the video. So it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like Jenga. You just stack it up, and then you put your kindling and twigs and paper in the middle, and the fire burns from the bottom up and out. It's one of our most basic methods. It's really easy to construct. It's also a great method for cooking as well. So as you can see here on the left, you can make log cabins in a square shape, but also in a triangular shape. They work well as well. Next up is the teepee method. A little bit hard to get right at the beginning, just getting that balance, but once you're going, it's quite easy as well. Same method, we're going to put our kindling in the bottom there, and your fire is going to burn from the bottom up and out. Teepee fires are really great for spreading the heat out, so they're great warmth fires, but they're not great for cooking because they don't have a flat surface to cook on. If you try to cook, the fire kind of just collapses. So another very popular one is the combination method, where you combine a log cabin and a teepee. It gets your fire going pretty quickly, and it also gets your fire really hot really fast because you've got a denser concentration of wood. So if you want to get warmth really quickly, this is a great method. It's also a little bit better at protecting your kindling when you light it from the wind, because there's a little bit more protection there from the different layers. You do have to be worried about airflow though, so making sure your spacing is enough for that. So it's a very popular method. There are a few other methods. I don't have photos of them, but I would suggest you all look them up. So you've got your lean-to method, which is basically you can either lean a fire against an object, or you take a big log, and that's your one side of your wall, and then you lay sticks along that edge, creating like a lean-to A-frame shape. And then you light your fire under that, and your fire lights up and out, but out in only one direction. So that one big starting log is your windbreak, and then your fire sort of burns away from that windbreak. It creates a smaller starting fire, but it's great for windy conditions. A star fire is basically a small little fire that you start in the center, and you have big long logs reaching out from that in a star formation. And these are great for small amounts of heat, as well as bringing them under shelters like tarps. Don't obviously bring in a tent, but it doesn't produce a lot of heat or smoke, so it doesn't necessarily burn your tarp underneath. So if you just need a small fire for warmth and light, it's a great option, and it burns really slowly. So if you have a shortage of wood, it's a great way to do it as well. A platform fire, very similar to the log cabin formation. So you build up your log cabin, but you actually have layers. So instead of having that open shape, you create floors within your log cabin structure, and then you light your fire from the top down. So where your log cabin burns from the ground up, the platform style burns from the top down to the bottom. It creates a very good cooking fire because you've got a flat surface with coals immediately there at the top. The trench pit is great for wind and cooking. So it's basically you just dig a small pit and build sort of a log cabin style or lean-to style fire within a pit. It's also great for cooking because you've got your coals already in there. They're not going to spread out anywhere. And then another one that's pretty complicated that I won't really get into is called the Dakota Fire Hole. It's sort of an anti-smoke fire. It involves digging tunnels and things. It's quite complicated, and a lot of people don't use it, but some survivalists do. There are a few other methods out there as well, but these are sort of the big ones that exist. So moving on to rainy or wet conditions. So you're going to want to look for wood such as birch bark, like I said, because birch bark can light whether it's wet or dry. So if you can find birch logs, so an actual log from a birch tree that has the birch bark on it still, the birch bark will light first and then the birch log underneath it will light as well. So birch is great for rainy and wet conditions, as well as looking for hanging deadwood. I know we talked about deadfall as the rule, but hanging deadwood basically means branches that have already broken off from a tree, but kind of get stuck in the branches of other trees as they fall. And so it's completely dead, it's completely separated from a tree, but it's kind of just hanging in the canopy. So you can often see them as you walk through the forest, and because they're hanging, they dry out really easily and really quickly, and they're also protected from the rain from the canopy of other trees. So they stay drier a lot longer than other wood on the ground would. And you can normally reach these up and grab them, or throw a rope with a little weight and sort of pull it through the branches and knock those branches down to the ground. As well as this is one method where that small tea light or candle could come in handy, because you've got a steady light then from your candle. It's small, but it does produce heat. So if you have it, it will dry out whatever is underneath it over a few minutes. And once you get that first log lit, the rest kind of goes and it becomes easier to light the rest. So another method, which we'll show in a video at the end, is the pot method. I'll be talking about it in the next few slides as well, but you basically light a small fire in a pot in a shelter like under your tarp, and then you move this little fire once it's lit to your designated fire outside, so that you've already got something started, and then it'll catch the rest of your logs on fire as well. Once you have your campfire built and going, you want to place your other logs that you intend to put on your fire or on the edges of your campfire. This dries them out, so the heat from your fire dries out those logs, and you'll often be able to watch and see them bubbling as the water comes out if you take a closer look at them. Windy conditions. Very similar to wet conditions, but a few different things. So we can use the same candle method as well as the pot method. And the lean-to fire construction method that I talked about at the beginning is really great for this. You can build it on either a small scale or a large scale, but because it's got that initial windbreak, it's great for windy conditions. You just want to position it in the right direction. So you want to have your windbreak against the direction that the wind is coming from. You can also create windbreaks with other methods, like putting up a tarp or creating a rock wall or something, and those work very effectively as well. And they kind of keep the heat in as well. You also should keep your fire small so it stays in control. With winds, fires pick up really suddenly. So where you have, okay, a large fire and you're like, oh, it's all good, you get a big wind come and your fire's doubled in size, and people can lose control of their fires fairly quickly. Another really important consideration is to have extra fuel available. So that's more wood. Because of that wind, your fire is getting a lot more oxygen, so it burns much faster, sometimes twice as fast. So you're gonna go through your wood. So especially at night, you're gonna want to make sure you've collected enough wood, if it's a really windy day, that you're not gonna run out. Winter fires. Similar to the last two, but with some slight differences. So in the winter time, the tea light method is really great because it's got your initial fire basically already started, and that small amount of heat from that candle is able to light small twigs that you've got there because they're most likely wet from the snow, and it dries them out. And then once those sticks, the twigs get lit, then the bigger logs dry out from that, and you sort of have a domino effect until your campfire is built. And the tea light candles are basically disposable, so you just leave them in your fire and they'll melt away once your fire started. The pot method also works really well because the pot is a dry area and it's sort of contained, but it's not always necessary. When you're building a fire in the winter though, you want to make sure you've dug down to the bare ground so you don't build it on snow ever, because obviously when the snow starts to melt, that's just adding water to your fire. So you dig down to the bare ground and you dig out, normally double the size or diameter of your fire pit so that any melted snow around from residual heat doesn't trickle into your fire. And then place wet logs on the edges of your fire once it's started, and very similar to the wet conditions, and look for hanging deadwood. Same idea for rainy and wet conditions. Hanging deadwood is not going to get as much snow on it, so it won't be as wet, and it'll also be drying during the day. So in the sun, it'll be drying out that wood. So hanging wood is normally dry in the winter time versus wood on the ground is normally wet or frozen from snow. Another thing to consider is the kind of wood you're using. So in the wintertime, it's really great to use conifer trees. That can be like pine trees and other evergreens. Their sap content and oils make them extra flammable, especially in the wintertime. That's really great because it makes the fire easier to get started, and it'll burn hotter at first. So once you've got that fire going with your pine, you can move on to some of the other hardwoods that might be available to you. So this is a video of our pot method. So basically our campfire didn't work. It's too windy for our lighter. We're gonna build it fire in the pot. We're just putting some kindling, some twigs, some paper, and then we're basically gonna light that. And it's protected from the wind in there, so it's not gonna blow out right away. As you can see, we're in a stainless steel pot, so don't use any aluminum pot that's gonna warp from the heat. And don't use a pot that you're worried about getting sooty, but in a survival situation, you rather sacrifice your pot for your warmth than not. So there you go, we've got our fire going, and then we're gonna transfer that fire to the center, in this case of our log cabin. We're gonna dump some of it on there, and then if you have any residual fire left, you can kind of just move it out of the way and dump it out somewhere else, or dump it in all of it in the center of your fire. So there you go. As you can see, as soon as we dumped it in the center, the fire immediately takes off because you've already got your base started, and the rest of your fire picks up really quickly after that. So it's a really great method that a lot of people don't know about and a lot of people don't think about. But especially if you're using stainless steel or cast iron pots, to get a little sooty, you can just clean them out with snow or water and they're good to go. So in a survival situation or even just basic situations, the pot method is the way to go. I use it quite often. So cooking versus warmth-based fires. So for cooking, you're only going to want to use cast iron and stainless steel pots and pans and related items. If you use aluminum-based things and some other softer metals, they can warp and burn on the fire and basically destroy your pots. So you're going to want to use iron and stainless steel because it won't warp under the heat of a campfire. They will get sooty on the outside, which is something to be aware of. So don't get that dirt all over you, and you have to be okay with that. But that soot can be cleaned off in many cases. You want to keep your fire small but hot. And what that basically means is keep your coals centered, keep a small fire that you continuously feed with fuel, but don't let it get super large because you actually lose heat sometimes in larger fires. So a small, dense fire is better for cooking over. And what the best method of cooking is not actually the fire itself, but it's the coals. That's where a lot of the heat is trapped. And it's the most sort of even way of controlling temperature. So fires are very unpredictable when it comes to heat. There's wind, there's movement. So the coals have a steady heat source. So we're going to spread out coals and cook our pots and pans under that, or cook them over a very small cooking fire. Dutch ovens are another great way to cook with a fire. They use coals as their method of cooking. So you basically put coals underneath, You've got your Dutch oven, which is basically like a big either ceramic or metal pot. And then you put coals on top and around, and it cooks from both the bottom and the top. There are lots of different things you can cook in there, cakes and cookies and breads and really any other thing as well, foods of any kind. And they're really often used, although they are very heavy. So people don't normally bring them on backcountry trips unless they're canoeing. Warmth-based fires are a little bit different. You're going to want to build them up a lot larger than you would a cooking fire, but not too large that they could lose control. So a good way to do that is with hardwoods such as oak, hickory, and maple. And those burn really steadily for a longer period of time, and they don't burn as quickly as some of our other woods, like our pines burn up a lot faster. So they're great to get a fire started, but they're not great for that long-standing heat that you hope for. Another thing to consider is creating a reflector. So you can do that naturally out of stone. So kind of create a stone wall, and the heat rays actually will bounce off that wall towards whatever direction is opposite of them. So it's a great way to kind of direct your heat source so you're not losing unnecessary heat to one side of your fire if there's nobody over there. You can also sort of manually create that with a mylar blanket or some other reflective surface. So you kind of position it the same way the stone wall would act, and it's going to reflect your heat back that same way. You can also use mylar reflective material to create sort of a reflective oven to cook with as well. The TP method is one of the best methods for warmth-based fires because they've got a circular heat. So the heat is going out, not up. And so you've got equal heat and more of it. So I know that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time, but what we really want this to be is an interactive session. So we want to ask you guys if you have any questions or any insights that you would like to share with the group about experiences you've had, tips and tricks you know, or anything like that. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen just so we can see everyone. So if you have a question or a comment, I'll ask that you turn off your mic. If you feel comfortable, you can turn on your camera and speak to the group. If you don't feel comfortable, I'm going to be stop sharing so you can type it in the chat and I can read it out for you as well. So does anyone have any questions about anything we just went over? I know it was a lot of information, or anything that we didn't go over that you would like covered, big or small.
I have a question. This is Catherine.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the platform method. Could you explain that again?
So if you're familiar with the log cabin, let me just start sharing for a minute and pull up a log cabin so it's a little bit clearer. Okay, for some reason it's not letting me share, so I'll just explain it. So we've got our log cabin, sort of the hashtag symbol look to it. So for each one of our layers, so for each one of those hashtags, if that makes sense, or our number symbol, you're going to create what they call a platform. So instead of having an open area in the center, you're going to create like a ceiling with small logs placed close together. And so that creates your first platform, and then you're going to create another platform on top of that and another one. So you'll have 3 or 4, and it creates a very sort of heat encompassing, enclosing area. So as each platform burns down, it's trapping the heat and the coals with it. And so it's great for cooking. And because this is lit from the top and burning down, the fire only gets hotter as sort of time goes on, if that makes sense. So you should have like a whole bunch of little ceilings within your log cabin. So it's built the same way as a log cabin, just with ceilings in between your different layers.
How do you ensure that you have enough airflow?
So the airflow for that normally comes from the sides instead of the top, like from the center. So you're not doing a platform at every single opening. It's like every other opening. So you know how you start off with 2 logs on the bottom and then 2 crisscross. So that's your first sort of number symbol hashtag. Then you've got your platform, and then you do that again. So you'd have 1 slit. So it goes like slit, platform, slit, platform. So it doesn't have as much airflow as some of the other methods. But because you've got a cooking fire and it burns slower, you're not trying to necessarily create this big fire really quickly. So you're not as concerned about the airflow problem.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any insight or thoughts about fire irons for cooking?
And by fire iron, do you mean just like a grill?
No, it's not a grill. They're just 2 like I've seen different ones. I just don't know which is best. It's not a grill in that there's no crossbars. It's just 2 bars, usually 2, sometimes 3, that just go straight across the fire in a parallel method. So there's no crossbars like a grill.
And I mean, that's for like putting some sort of pot or something on top as an
Yes.
easy sort of quick and easy dirty way of doing it.
Very effective way, but there's just a number of I've seen people using different materials, and I just wondered if you had any insight into what you like to use, or if you use them.
I don't normally use them because it's, for the most part, when I'm doing fires, it's out in the back country, so it's one more thing to bring out with you. But I have heard of people using them, so I don't have a lot of experience with them. But you need a hard metal for that doesn't warp well, but those metals get heavy, which is why I don't know how often they really get used. I don't know how much information I can really give about those, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? They can be big or small, or if you just want to share an experience you've had about a fire you've made, any issues you had that you'd like to discuss and how you solved them.
So I kind of have a funny story from canoe tripping on the Moisey River in
Yeah.
Quebec. So it was near the end of the trip, and we were camping kind of on I think it's called a talus. It's like a rock bed next to a cliff, and so the water level changes frequently on the Moisey River, and so for our evening meal, we built a fire pretty close to the shoreline, and basically overnight, like the entire so as we were cooking the meal, as it got later on in the evening, the water level was actually rising, and we actually had to like move the fire and cook as like water was pouring into the fire pit. So it was pretty crazy, and we woke up with our tents like sitting in an inch of water.
It's a funny story. That's where the situational awareness comes in and knowing your surroundings. So that doesn't happen. But no camping trip is complete without a story like that. Something always happens that's worth telling.
What's your favorite river?
Oh, I'm not really a river canoeing or kayaking person. I mainly do lakes, I'm afraid. The only river I really have any experience with is the Black and Green rivers near my cottage, but they're not super big by any means.
When do you assume that, or when do you think that the club is going to run trips again?
That is kind of a question nobody really knows the answer to. So we know at the earliest January, because that's what the university has said right now. But I have a feeling with the announcement of online classes that that will be pushed till probably the summertime. We are pretty much ready to go as soon as the university gives us the okay. But we do have to follow the university policies until that point, unfortunately. We have lots of trips planned that could pretty much be ready to go within a week. So as soon as we get that, yes, you can, we'll be going out pretty much right away. But we're hopefully releasing some resources and some different workshops and office hours for people to create their own trips who might not otherwise go on their own. Does anyone else have any questions or stories they'd like to share regarding fire building or any other outdoor related questions that I can answer for you guys? Anything related to the club as well is completely open. All right. Well, that's all from me, folks. We will be continuing our workshop series. So every other week we'll have a different workshop. And then in the weeks in between, we're having different speakers come in. So I encourage you all to check out those in the future. And if there's something specific that you'd like us to talk about, we're completely open to any and all topics related to the outdoors. So if there's something you've really been craving a discussion about or want more information on, please reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try and make that happen for you guys. And we hope to see you all at our next workshop. Thank you all and have a great evening.